This is a recording for Chapter 12, Growth and Change. How did Alberta change after 1905? I've just started drawing grain elevators. They are tall buildings that were once commonly used to store grain alongside the railway tracks. My teacher put one of my pictures of a grain elevator on the bulletin board. She said it relates to what we are learning about homesteading in Alberta. Homesteading means settling on and farming land. We talked in class about how the farmers got their land. The planners who developed the Homestead Act in 1872 must have loved mathematics. They took a map of the Northwest Territories, and on top of the map they drew big squares. Each square was 6 miles by 6 miles, about 9.7 kilometers by 9.7 kilometers. The lands inside these squares were called townships. The planners then divided each township into smaller squares. Now each township had 36 sections. Each section was 1 mile by 1 mile. Each section was further divided into quarters. A quarter section equals 160 acres, about 65 hectares. The planners felt a homesteader would have enough land on a quarter section to support a family with mixed farming. So as you can see in this image, it's showing townships, how much a section is, and how much a quarter section is. Somebody asked, could anybody claim the land just like that? Our teacher explained. Back then, the head of a family or 21-year-old males could apply for land. They had to be Canadian, and they had to do certain things listed in Canada's Homestead Act. Our teacher used a web to explain how the act worked. Homestead Act, 1872. What did homesteaders have to do? Clear part of the land, pay $10 to ask for a homestead quarter section, build a home and live there at least 6 months of the year, grow crops within 3 years. How did homesteaders meet their needs? What artifacts and buildings teach us about the past? What changes affected the quality of life in Alberta? In what ways did immigrants who came to Alberta after 1905 contribute to the province? Why did urban communities grow? Plamondon. People came from across Canada, the United States, and the world to homestead in Alberta. Joseph Plamondon, a francophone from Quebec, moved with his family as a young boy to Michigan, in the United States. He later married Matilda, and they had 15 children. Land was available in Alberta. Francophone missionaries encouraged the families in Michigan to move north. Joseph told his sons about the opportunity. He believed Alberta would be a place where they could keep their language, religion, and culture. His 19-year-old son, Isidore, moved north. For a time, he worked in the area between Lacombe and Morinville. He wrote letters to his family urging them to join him. This is an English translation of Isidore's letter. Father, I have found the most beautiful country. I traveled a great deal, and there's nothing that can compare with this wonderful province. What can a young man do on a little farm in Provemont? In Alberta, one can obtain a new farm of 160 acres for $10. In July 1908, Isidore's family and friends arrived in Morinville. For weeks, they prepared to move north, to settle and set up a farm. They bought horses and cattle. Later in July, they reached the area now called Plamondon. The Métis in the area taught the homesteaders many needed skills such as hunting, trapping, and fishing. They showed them how to use the natural resources that surrounded them in their new home. Why do you think Joseph Plamondon believed Alberta would be a good place to maintain the French language, Catholic religion, and Francophone culture? Francophone identity. Ever since Francophones came to Alberta, they have been working to keep their identity. As we've studied Alberta, I have found out what a challenge this has been. It means many people have worked hard to gain and keep language and education rights. For me, it means that I have always been able to attend a Francophone school because this has been possible in Edmonton since 1984. Francophone schools help make students proud of their Francophone identity. What might Francophones have said about their education and language rights and their identity over time? 1891. Since 1860, Roman Catholic schools have provided instruction in French. In 1875, the laws in the Northwest Territories allowed Francophones living there to use French as a language of instruction. We are glad our rights are respected. Francophone living in the Northwest Territories. 1905. In 1892, the Assembly made English the required language in schools. 1 hour of instruction in French is allowed. Many children are finding it very hard to be taught in a language they barely understand. What about our rights? Alberta's celebrating becoming a province this year. I wish we Francophones could also celebrate being able to learn in our own language. Francophone parent. This year, the Official Languages Act came into effect. It is meant to make sure services in French and English are provided by the Government of Canada. As a Francophone, I am proud to be a part of an official language group of Canada, Alberta Francophone. 1987. I'm going into grade 4 next year. I'm glad I can continue to learn in my first language, French. Francophones have been working to get this right back for nearly 100 years. Francophone students. 2006. Since 1994, Francophones have had the right to make decisions about their schools. We have 27 now in 5 regions. Because of all the work done in the past, my children attend excellent Francophone schools. Francophone parent. How have Francophones in Alberta kept their language and identity? Starting a homestead. How did homesteaders meet their needs? Homesteaders often used what they had brought with them and what was available in the land around them. They lived in a variety of homes depending on when they came and where they settled. Wagons and tents. Some settlers lived under their wagons where they improved their land. Others lived in tents during the summer. Their winter homes were often cellars or hillside caves dug by hand. Soddies. In some areas of southern Alberta, there were few trees. Homesteaders cut prairie sod and stacked it for walls. Sod was also placed on top of boards on the rooftop. Cabins. Where there were trees, homes were made of logs. Houses had few, if any, windows. Roofs were made of sod. Bundles of straw called thatch, logs or planks with tree bark attached. Prefabricated homes. People who had more money could purchase a prefabricated home. The materials would be sent in crates, already cut and ready to assemble. Absalom Burry in the Olds came west with the Northwest Mounted Police. His house, which is still standing, was ordered out of an Eaton's catalog. Medical care. Homesteaders had to pay for medical treatment themselves. Often, people could not afford to pay for the medical help they needed. Some country areas had no doctors or medical supplies were far away. An aviation hero. In the winter of 1928, diphtheria broke out in Little Red River, 80 kilometers from Fort Vermilion. Diphtheria is a disease caused by a bacteria. The bacteria attacks the throat and causes difficulty in breathing. The people in Little Red River radioed for help. There was a supply of vaccines in Edmonton that could be flown north to save the people. However, the weather was minus 40 degrees Celsius. Despite the weather, Wap May took the challenge. He flew to Fort Vermilion in the uncovered cockpit of a biplane. The plane flew at about 160 kilometers per hour. Imagine the biting cold he must have felt. When Wap May arrived, his fingers were frozen to the controls of the plane. Wap May became one of Alberta's great aviation heroes. Number one, what things do you think homesteading parents worried about for their children? What hopes did they have for them? Number two, building a shelter was a priority for homesteaders. What other things might have been important to them as they set up their homesteads? Food. Homesteaders had a variety of foods. Their diet was based on what the land offered and what they could produce themselves. They picked wild berries such as saskatoons, blueberries, and strawberries. They learned which mushrooms were good to eat and which were poisonous. Many Aboriginal people shared their knowledge about how to use plants. Hogweed, for example, could be boiled like spinach. Dandelion leaves were made into salads, and their roots could be made into a drink. Mints were used to make teas. Vegetables. Many homesteaders brought seeds and vegetable gardens. Some vegetables, such as beans and peas, were dried for winter use. Root vegetables, such as potatoes, onions, carrots, and beets, were stored in root cellars. Cabbage was often salted and turned into sauerkraut. Sometimes vegetables were heated and then put into jars to prevent spoiling. This was called canning. When families could afford it, they bought cases of fruit to can and sugar to make berries into jam. Meat. Hunting provided meat until the homesteaders had animals that could be butchered. Wild birds, rabbits, and fish were common meals. In the fall, deer, moose, and elk provided meat for families, if the men could find time to go hunting. Meat and fish were preserved by drying, smoking, or salting. Food was kept frozen when the weather allowed it. Chickens were kept for their eggs, and cows were kept for their milk. A homesteading family. In 1928, Manya Oksokovich came to Alberta from Ukraine when she was 9 years old. Her mother, Juliana, stepfather, Clem, and her 17-year-old brother, John, also made the journey. They arrived by a boat in Halifax and then crossed Canada by train. Manya wrote to her oldest brother, Peter, who was still in Ukraine. He was saving money to bring his family to Canada. Sangudo, Alberta, July 18th, 1928. Hello from our new farm. Peter, we are so lucky. Now we are homesteaders and we have more land than you can imagine. There is so much space here and so many trees. When clearing land, farmers can leave some trees and still have enough room for planting and buildings. Johnny and stepfather have gone to work at a sawmill, so we have money for a good horse team. Today, mother's gone to the next farm. If she picks tree roots for a day, she will earn a chicken. She wants to get 12 to make a little flock. We need chickens to get eggs to sell. Must go, love, Manya. Sangudo, Alberta, September 18th, 1929. Dear Peter, I wish I was in school, but right now there is too much work to do here. We've got a huge garden. I've been helping to get the root vegetables dug up. I'm also helping Mrs. Liss at the neighboring farm. We are getting food ready for the threshing cruise. The men need 3 big meals a day with sandwiches and pie snacks. That's 6 meals. Mrs. Liss says the crews always prefer the farms with the best meals. She says a lot depends on her cooking. Thankfully, it is Sunday and we have a day of rest. My English is getting better. Now I get to go to town more often to translate for the rest of the family. That's good. Mind you, now I understand the threshing crews when they tease me. That's bad. Love from your sister, Manya. How has life changed for 9-year-olds since 1929? Forming towns. Towns were almost always built on transportation routes. Many towns were built along rivers. After the 1880s, new towns were built alongside the railway. This photo shows Wetaskiwin in 1898. Farm stores and catalogs. Small